Byzantine study professors. So congratulations, Angeliki, for all your efforts, and I'm sure I would love to have been there, but I'm sure it will take off to success.
We hope so. Thank you.
Congratulations for your efforts.
So now we can I can introduce Effie to our audience before we begin. Well, when I was first asked about Effie many years ago, because I know Effie since 2012, I think, I answered that, you know, Effie is a sort of a pioneer in the study of war and conflict in Greece, because she, first of all, she's a woman, and a woman studying war, it's something even more exceptional, I have to say, because traditionally the study of war and conflict in the Balkans, and we have plenty of war and conflict in the Balkans throughout history, it's a male-dominated sport, and Effie is a pioneer, and I have read not the largest part of your book, which is also exceptional. So Effie is a historian and we graduated from the same university, from Ionian University in Corfu. And she has been a research fellow in several institutions, including the University of Athens, the Institute of Byzantine Research, again in Athens, and she has taught also in different universities, the University of Thessaloniki, if I'm not mistaken, the University of Patras, the Ionian University, and now she is an assistant professor at the University of Ioannina, one of the greatest history departments that we have in Greece. And she has several research interests, including social and military history of Byzantium, of course, Byzantium and the Balkans, the historical geography in the Middle Ages, which is very challenging, and Byzantium after Byzantium, of course. And she's also interested in the local history of her region of Epirus. Again, she published in 2008, if I'm not mistaken, her first book on war in Western Greece in the late Middle Ages, πόλεμος στον ύστερο ελλαδικό χώρο, στον δυτικό ελλαδικό χώρο κατά τον ύστερο Μεσαίωνα. And tell us about what you're working on now. What are you going to publish now? What is your latest book that you will publish?
Well, I'm planning to publish a new monograph on the despotate of Epirus, but I'm trying to see this state and beyond Byzantium. Okay. So I'm studying all the sources, the meta-Byzantines, after Byzantium sources. Mm-hmm. And I would like to make an overall presentation of the despotate through the medieval times, but also in modern times.
Excellent, excellent. Looking forward to it. Looking forward.
Thank
so I think it's 7 minutes past 6. So without further ado, I think the virtual floor is yours, Effie. So you can share your screen. And you can enlighten us on the Albanians.
Yes. Okay, I have to share my screen, but I can't find it. Oh, no. I can't find it. Why?
Στο τέρμα, να, okay.
Yes, okay, I found it. Share, okay, but I can't find my screen, so, yeah. Can you see it?
Βλέπουμε, όχι ακόμα, δεν βλέπουμε το PowerPoint. Don't see the PowerPoint now.
Why?
We see the Zoom screen.
Yes, but there is a message that say that my screen sharing is paused. But why?
Είναι the sharing options that you have. Sharing options again. Now share the PowerPoint. Share the PowerPoint. Share screen, and then you will share your PowerPoint.
Just a moment, because I lost it. Share screen, okay, and then
the PowerPoint, or share screen, just share screen, usually on the top left. Yes.
Okay.
Very good.
Okay. Thank you.
Κάνε λίγο το PowerPoint να δούμε αν αλλάζουν οι εικόνες. Ωραία. Okay.
This is
οπότε πήγαινε στην αρχή πάλι και είμαστε μια χαρά. Όλα τα βλέπουμε μια χαρά.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for these seminars and for this invitation. So I'm grateful, and I hope to respond to the audience expectations. And today we're going to talk about the Albanians and their movings, their migration in Romania and the Byzantine lands. The ever-present issue of migration in the medieval Balkans and the Eastern Mediterranean is a truly fertile field for historical research. Scholars of Byzantium have produced some studies on the matter, though the population movements are discussed in a somewhat fragmented manner and from a variety of different aspects: political, demographic, sociological, economic, anthropological, cultural, etc. Here are some characteristic examples. The proceedings of the 15th International Conference of Byzantine Studies, which focused on the movements of various nations, Armenians, Cumans, etc., discussed the period between the 11th and 13th century. Additionally, the collective volume published by Arbeler and Laïu, titled Studies on Internal Diaspora of the Byzantine Empire, examined issues of assimilation of different ethnic and religious groups into the Byzantine states from the Middle Byzantine period onwards. Other studies have utilized population movements in order to shed light on city population sizes or on phenomena such as war and its socio-demographic impacts, or even to demonstrate the local history of particular regions in the aftermath of the Crusader conquest of Constantinople. Recently, Preiser, Kapaer, and others published their migration histories of the medieval Afro-Eurasian transition zone, aspects of mobility between Africa, Asia, and Europe as part of an Austrian Academy of Sciences research program titled Moving Byzantium. This work illuminates human mobility throughout a wide range in the Eastern Mediterranean. All the aforementioned studies, which examine population movements either directly or indirectly, show the multidisciplinary trends of the recent research. They try to approach the multifaceted phenomenon of migration in the Byzantine and medieval world. As regards the Balkan people in particular, the movements of the Slavs have been thoroughly discussed. By contrast, the presence in Byzantium of the South Slavs, Serbs, Bulgars, and other groups, such as the Albanians during the late Byzantine period, remains an open question. One, it must be noted, that is markedly difficult to approach. It was during this crucial period, after the Crusader conquest of Constantinople, that the political fragmentation of the Byzantine world radically changed the whole backdrop. A multitude of different dominions, Latin and to a lesser extent Greek, were founded in the former Byzantine lands, constituting the new political environment which could now be studied by an increased volume of evidence. Greek and Western sources, both narrative and archival, though often fragmentary and with varying degrees of reliability, render research into immigration a truly daunting task. However, this subject still constitutes both a challenge and an open invitation to scholars of Byzantine and medieval society at large. The migration of the Albanians into medieval Greece was a major topic in the studies of Dusselier, Nistazopoulou Pelekitou, Katsaropoulou, Assonitis, Correa, and some others. I myself have examined the presence of the Albanians in Epirus, focusing on their political and especially their military activities. From their first references in the Byzantine historical sources in the 11th century to the Ottoman conquest of the Balkans in the 15th century and beyond, the Albanians played a major role in the socio-political developments in both the Byzantine state and the local Latin and Greek lordships that emerged after 1204. Their role was also crucial throughout the southwestern Balkans, as they participated in a massive wave of immigration that took place in the late medieval period. Entering and remaining in Byzantine Greek or Latin-occupied regions, the Albanians undoubtedly contributed to their demographic renewal. In addition, they experienced, together with the local populations, all the difficult conditions of a period fraught with war, disease, political instability, and perpetual insecurity. Let us make a few remarks on the Albanians and their region. As mentioned previously, the first reference to the Albanians in the Byzantine sources comes from the work of the 11th century historian Michael Attaliatis, who names them as Arvanites. Previous historical references are not extant. However, they appear to have lived under Byzantine rule in the theme of Dyrrhachium, an administrative and military province on the western fringes of the state, which had attracted the attention of the Bulgarians in the 9th and 10th centuries and of the Westerners, Normans, Franks, and Venetians from the 11th century onwards. The involvement of the latter appears to have paved the way for the emergence of the Albanians on the historical stage. The second reference to the Albanians is in the Alexiad by the 12th century Byzantine writer Anna Komnene, who also refers to their homeland, known as Arvanon or Arvana. This was an isolated mountainous region between Dyrrhachium and Ohrid in the Elbasan region, according to the description of the 13th century historian George Acropolitis. The information of these two sources describes the region as a province of the Byzantine Empire in the late 11th century and also suggests the existence of a local ruling class. In fact,
Εφη, συγγνώμη που διακόπτω, νομίζω το slide δεν αλλάζει. I think your PowerPoint is frozen. Can you check if you have you changed from the second to the third?
My PowerPoint changes normally.
Yeah, because we in Zoom
Now?
it has frozen. Try and change it again. Change to another slide.
Okay, I changed.
No.
I changed.
Yeah. What should we do now? Because it has happened again. It's not only with you. It has happened also with Panos's, Panos Sofoudis's PowerPoint and with others.
Do I have to get out with my...
Yeah, okay. Εντάξει, επανήλθε. Okay, so go, yeah, you can go back now. Yeah, it's okay, επανήλθε.
Okay.
Ναι, πήγαινε στο αυτό. Ωραία, είσαι εδώ, εντάξει, okay.
In fact, a century later, this local ruling class founded a principality centered on Krouia, fighting for its autonomy in a notably hostile environment. The titles held by the final lord of the Principality of Krouia, Dimitrio, such as Princeps Arbanorum or Magnus Archon, suggest the existence of an independent political entity. Despite not witnessing further development, this entity did expand its territories in the late 12th century, incorporating Arbanon into its domains. Contemporary scholarship identifies this as the homeland of the Arvanites, or the Albanians, and the start point of their migratory movements into the Haldun region and the West. From the 13th century onwards, the terms Arvanites and Arvanon began to be refined in the sources as Alvanites and Albanon, according to Acropolitis. The term Albanians, Albani in Greek, appeared in the 14th century, probably from the earlier Arvanites or Albanites. According to one explanation, the term Albanians, Albani, had its origins in the descriptions of the inhabitants of Roman Latium, Albani, or of the Caucasian Albanians, peoples known to the Byzantines, but with no relation to the Balkan Albanians. In any event, the historical sources of the period, such as the work of John Katakousinos and the Greek chronicles on the 14th and 15th history of Epirus, namely the Chronicle of Ioannina and the Chronicle of the Toko, use the terms Albanite, Albanitia, and Albana to describe this particular people and their homeland. So the evolution of the terms, as you can see in this photo, Arvanites, from Arvanites to Albani, in the Byzantine sources, is probably a testament to the evolution of medieval Albanian society. Further information on their everyday life and social structure can be inferred from their Alpine origins, which reveal a closed, endogamous, fiercely traditional clan society with an economy based on agriculture and animal husbandry. These elements all point to a local origin for the Albanians, who have been recognized by modern scholarship as descendants of the ancient Illyrians. Indeed, the Byzantine sources refer to them as such. These people, who lived on the northwestern fringes of the Byzantine Empire, sparked debates and discussions in historical scholarship regarding their political and geographical delineation. Geography, however, is an imperfect tool in the examination of space and men's relation to it, especially as regards the often misaligned political and geographical boundaries of the medieval period. In this light, the opinion that the history of medieval Albania is not the history of the state, but instead, to a lesser extent, the history of the people, and to greater extent, the history of the country, seems to hit the nail on the head. In addition, as Smith has proved, the ethnonym Albanian in the medieval sources has the meaning either of a man who speaks the Albanian language or originates in the geographic region of Albania or lives in the mountains and countryside. So the geographical region that was once the homeland of the ancient Illyrians belonged to the Byzantine state and subsequently to the state established in Epirus in the 13th century after the Latin conquest of Byzantium.
Συγγνώμη που διακόπτω πάλι, αλλά λοιπόν με το PowerPoint, επειδή πάλι έχει παγώσει. Λοιπόν, Δημητρή, είχες μια ιδέα. Δημητρή, you have an idea that you have to...
Ναι, κυρία Σygkellou, θα κάνετε escape από την εικόνα που είστε, από το... Ωραία, κλείστε το share και όταν μόλις το πατήσετε ξανά, θα σας εμφανιστούν δύο επιλογές PowerPoint. Την δεξιά θα πατήσετε, αυτή δηλαδή που τρέχουν οι εικόνες, γιατί αυτό εγκλωβίζει τη μία που έχετε αρχικά μπροστά σας και μετά κολλάνε. Εσείς το προχωράτε κανονικά, αλλά εμείς βλέπουμε εκείνη τη στιγμή. Τώρα, αν κάνετε ένα share, τώρα προχωράνε οι εικόνες. Για αλλάξτε λίγο.
Προχωρούσαν και πριν, αλλά το θέμα ότι πάλι κόλλησε. Αυτό το θέμα.
Τώρα κολλάνε. Αν είναι πιο μικρές, κολλάνε.
Όχι έτσι. Έτσι αν μείνουνε και στο συνεχίσετε με τον κέρσορα. Τέλεια.
Ωραία, με τον κέρσορα ακριβώς. Ναι, με τον κέρσορα. Εντάξει. Με το βελάκι. Εντάξει.
Θα το αφήσω έτσι, ναι.
Έγινε, τέλεια.
Okay. It was influenced by both East and West, though it remained inevitably a Balkan country, as dictated by its geography and the way of life and organization of its inhabitants. Ultimately, a strong adjacent Greek presence, constant changes in leadership and overlordship, and complex external influences, linguistic, religious, and political, fostered conditions of instability that precluded the organization of a formal medieval Albanian nation or state. The relationship between the Albanians and the Byzantines was primarily a military one, as attested by the sources. In the late 11th century, they fought for the Dukes of Dyrrhachium, Nikiforos Vassilakis, in his rebellion against the Byzantine state, according to Michael Ataliatis. Anna Komnene describes them as allies of the Byzantines in their battle with the Normans at Dyrrhachium at the end of the 11th century. According to George Acropolitis, they provided support to the lords of the state of Epirus in the 13th century. Once the Byzantines had reestablished their control over Epirus, the Albanians sided with them, fighting at their side against the Angevins at the end of the 13th century. Threatened by Serb advances in the early 14th century, they sided with the Angevins and were seconded with offices or feudal privileges. The latter saw the development in what is today modern Albania of local lordships, which became the dominant administrative structure of the time. Albanian support for the strongest player in a given period gave rise to a class of lords outside of the traditional clan structure. Combined with external pressures, this was a major development as the Albanians cut off from their property or attempting to escape the new feudal land situation introduced by the lords and gradually assuming nomadic habits began to gather once again around their clan leaders who, for whatever reason, had not managed to imitate the new land-owning class, according to Alain Toussaint. Thus, in the 15th century, the Albanians began their exodus towards various different destinations like Greece, central Italy, Apulia, etc., a phenomenon that would peak in the middle of the following century. The Byzantine historian John Katakouzinos notes the presence of autonomous nomad Albanians in Thessaly, a fact confirmed by the 14th century Latin sources. He also mentions the names of the clans, the Malakasei, Bua, Meserites, and in what appears to be somewhat of an overstatement, pins their number at 12,000. They seem to have lived independently in the mountainous regions of Thessaly and were only brought under Byzantine rule through the personal intervention of the emperor. Many of them served in the military of the local governor, John Angelos, in 1342, as well as of other local lords, Greek or foreigners, throughout Greece. Albanians were also recruited by the Catalan Company, which had seized the Frankish Duchy of Athens in the beginning of the 14th century and had become involved in wars in Thessaly at that period. Albanian mercenaries also fought for the Serbs, who conquered the regions of Macedonia, Epirus, and Thessaly, the first reservoirs of Albanian immigrants in the mid-14th century. The Serbs, for their part, rewarded them with lordships over various regions, as was the case in Epirus, a subject we will examine presently. The importance of the Albanian contribution to the militaries of this period cannot be overstated given the widespread lack of manpower. Led by their clan chieftains, Albanian mercenaries moved from Thessaly to Attica to serve the local Catalan and Tuscan lords, concurrently with movements of their compatriots to nearby islands and Euboea. The Latin sources, despite the degree of uncertainty regarding the social structures of these immigrants, describe families without prominent leaders, clans in a state of social collapse, with limited social hierarchy, an itinerant population ready to provide its services to any lord willing to have them. In Venetian-held regions, such as Euboea, they were utilized as part of a conscious settlement policy, renewing a population depleted by the wars and the plagues of the 14th century. Groups of Albanians continued south, past Corinth and into the Peloponnese, which was controlled at that time by the Byzantines in the Despotate of Mistras and various Westerners. The despot of Mistra, Theodore Paleologos, invited Albanian settlers into his lands to reconstitute his demographically and economically weakened state. According to the sources, in 1407, 10,000 Albanians were recorded living on abandoned lands around the isthmus of Corinth and were expected to contribute to the despotate militarily. Regardless, the Albanians of the Peloponnese were not a homogeneous people, as while many settled permanently and practiced agriculture or animal husbandry, many others fled to the mountains with their chieftains and practiced martial activities. At any rate, they were a force to be reckoned with in the 15th century, participating in military operations and expressing their disagreements to the local lords. Together with the local Greeks, they participated in numerous revolts against despots of Mistras. These revolts saw the rise of the Greco-Albanian elite with prominent individuals such as Manuel Bokhalis. A similar group, reliant primarily on their martial prowess, were the Stradioti, lightly armored mounted horsemen of Albanian or Greek origin who emerged in the Greek lands shaped by the military needs and the dominant strategy applied in the area, namely raiding and brigandage. They were extensively used by the Venetians in their conflicts with the Ottomans from the mid-15th century onwards. After the Ottoman conquest of the Peloponnese, in the middle of the 15th century, these soldiers moved either to the Venetian-controlled parts of Greece, like the Ionian Islands, or to southern Italy, where they formed networks of warriors and distinct Greco-Albanian communities. The Greeks and Albanians in the Peloponnese, who shared a common culture and experiences, common religions and consciousness, jointly revolted against Ottoman rule. The assimilation that took place over the following centuries gave later foreign travelers in the region the impression that they were visiting a country more Albanian than Greek. Albanian immigrants ultimately had a positive overall impact in Byzantine and Greek lands. From Thessaly to Attica and the Peloponnese, they were incorporated into the local population and contributed primarily, but not exclusively, to agriculture. As mercenary soldiers, they served various different lords and played an active part in contemporary military and political developments. Let us now look at the Albanians in Epirus. The first arrival of the Albanians in Epirus in the 14th century was far from a peaceful affair. Of course, this development was facilitated by the political situation in the aftermath of the collapse of the state of Epirus earlier in that century. The absence of centralized authority, clashes between local lords, and the conflicts between an ever-increasing number of contenders for the region had resulted in instability. The fact that Epirus neighbored their homeland merely contributed to the ease of Albanian interventions and immigration. Albanians began to carry out raids into northern Epirus in the 1330s, provoking a response from the Byzantine emperor, who organized a campaign to subdue them. In his description of this operation, John Katapousinos notes that the Albanians had the advantage of terrain, living in a harsh, mountainous environment which served to hold their martial nature. Not long after, they began to encroach upon southern Epirus, while the Serbs were making advances in mainland Greece. This was in 1342. By 1358, the Albanians had settled in southwestern Greece and were playing an active role in the conflicts between the Serb and Greek lords of the region. In 1359, they secured a crucial victory against Nikiforos Orsini, the last descendant of the lords of Epirus, at the Battle of Acheloos River, sealing their control over the region. From that point until the early 15th century, they formed localized political structures, displaying a widespread fragmentation of power already exacerbated by the Serbian conquest in the mid-14th century. According to the Byzantine historians of the 14th and 15th century, Nikiforos Gregoras and Laonikos Chalkokondylis, the Serbs legitimized Albanian rule over Epirus by rewarding them, the Albanians who had served in their armies, with ownership and administration of castles or even entire regions. Thus, with the blessing of the Serbs, the Albanians established their first lordships in the regions of Aetolia, Carnania, and Arta. These lordships were centered on the finger of their leader and often caused inter-clan conflicts. For example, the Sparta clan under Jean clashed with the Losha clan for control of Arta. Beginning in 1375 and for 25 years afterwards, Jean Sparta ruled over southern Epirus together with members of his clan. Gathering the support of the Malakassei clan, he attempted to conquer Ioannina, a prize also claimed by the Zenevisei clan of Girocaster and Himara. Despite their differences, the Sparta and Zenevisei ultimately joined forces in the early 15th century to face the threat posed by the Italian claimant to Epirus, the Duke of Cephalonia, Carlo Tocco. In this, they were aided by the Musakiei clan of Berat, in accordance with the traditional demands of unified military mobilization of the Albanian clans. However, after close to 15 years of conflict, Carlo managed to dislodge the Albanians from the region. Indeed, the Chronicle of the Tocco, a verse text describing the career of the Italian lord, describes the Albanians as a destabilizing factor in the region. Nevertheless, their martial prowess meant that they always had a place in his army, where they served alongside Greeks, Celts, and Latins. It is evident then that the Albanians in Epirus were a factor that had to be taken into serious consideration by any claimants to the region. Besides, the sources suggest that they seem to have comprised a significant proportion of the local population, with numerous clans, such as the Malakassei, Zenevisei, Mazarokei, Zulanei, Alkadi, Bua, etc. Many of their members, their lords in particular, utilized the political and cultural norms of the region. They adopted Byzantine models and numerous types of Western institutions that had been introduced in the heyday of the state of Epirus, thus legitimizing their rule. A notable such example is Jean Sparta's attempt to formalize his rule through an inscription he left as a record of his victory over the Knights of St. John, led by Fernandez de Herendia near Arta at the end of 14th century. Concurrently, Albanian traditions were melded with existing Moors, into a cultural formation that combined Byzantine and Greek customs, feudal perceptions, and Alpine martial practices. War, having brought the Albanians to power and largely sustaining them there, was always front and center. Safe behind the walls of their numerous castles, the existence of which demonstrates, as Grigoras put it, the existence of a large number of independent local lodges, the Albanians constructed a new political framework in pursuit of largely local interests. They often acted independently of the greater political centers to which they were or aspired to be connected for their formal legitimization. They struggled to preserve their authority, frequently utilizing violence with raiding or looting, and exhibited none of the long-term strategic goals that define formally organized political entities. Despite this overtly opportunistic nature, their lordships lasted for roughly 40 years, introducing the concept of regionalism to the area. This concept could be understood as a new local or regional consciousness, perhaps even as a new cultural identity. In this context, it is worth mentioning the case of two brothers from the region whose identities remain somewhat obscure to modern research. They are the Pikernis brothers, described in the Chronicle of the Toko as lords and owners of a local castle. This is the castle of Rhinyasa in the west coast of Epirus. Modern scholarship considers them to be Epirus Greeks, as their surname is of Greek origin and derives from the Byzantine title of Pikernis. But this opinion can be challenged. The Chronicle of the Toko presents them as nobles and renowned Albanian soldiers who possessed the castle of Rhinyasa with Albanian consent and supported Carlo Toko together with other Albanian soldiers. Their presence is undoubtedly connected with the Albanian rulers of the wider region, who granted castles to their compatriots or subjects. They could also be identified with the Albanian Stradioti, who came to stand out for their military prowess. Besides, their name is later encountered as a surname among the ranks of the Stradioti or as a toponym in the area of Avlona. The fact that they left their mark on the toponymic and anthroponymic landscape shows the fluidity caused by the political and demographic situation. In any case, the Pikernis brothers belonged to a local family, Greek and or Albanian, in the mentality of the author of the Chronicle of the Toko, who offered an eyewitness account of this new situation in Epirus after the Albanian movements and their osmosis with the local Greek Christian populations. They were also professional soldiers, acquiring a new identity which, together with their Christian identity, could help them integrate and identify as local Epirus. Returning now to the Albanian clans of Epirus, they played a leading role in political developments up to the first decades of the 15th century, when the Ottomans began encroaching on the region. Their advance led many Albanians to flee either into other areas of Greece or to Italy, while others sought refuge in the mountains. Indeed, the latter rose up against the Ottomans. We know all the case of the Skanderbeg. Large groups of Albanians left Epirus after its complete subjugation to the Ottomans, headed for Corfu, Venice, and Naples. The Albanians continued to immigrate through the 16th century, dispersing throughout Greece as part of Ottoman resettlement policies. The accounts that describe the Albanians of Epirus are sparse and all explicitly refer to the violent nature of their colonization of the region. The Greek sources, somewhat expectedly, adhere to the stereotypical view regarding barbaric invaders of Byzantine lands. Based on how they are described, their image appears wholly negative. They are volatile and show no respect for tradition, according to Kantakousinos. Cunning, deceitful, and aggressive brigands, according to the Chronicle of Ioannina. Harsh, greedy, and untrustworthy thieves, according to the Chronicle of the Toko. Nevertheless, according to the latter source, they produced strong warriors, such as the Maurice Sparta, and some able leaders, such as Jin Sparta. If one were to ignore the biases and ulterior motives of the Greek sources, the political activities of the Albanians within the context of their local lordships demonstrate a people whose rebellious independent nature was vital in securing their political survival. We now proceed to some final observations. The dispersal and movements of the Albanian people are defining characteristics of their medieval history. The former seems to have effectively prevented them from banding together in a unified political entity, while the latter was expressed in various ways. On the one hand, we have reports of brigandage, military operations, independence movements, and revolts. On the other, however, we see mass migrations of families or clans, essentially impoverished people who could either provide military service or settle into agricultural occupations to earn a living. Survival was paramount in both cases. Albanians first began to migrate into the southern Balkans and to Italy in the 14th century, continuing into the following century as a result of the Ottoman conquests. There are numerous reasons for this phenomenon, such as the collapse of the old social structures, perpetual military conflicts, successive overlords, poverty, and demographic decline after the Black Death and the epidemics that followed. However, Albanians who entered Byzantium encountered political instability there as well. Clans from Arvanon and the surrounding mountainous hinterlands followed the Via Egnatia and entered Western Macedonia and Thessaly. There, they initially led a nomadic existence, subsequently becoming farmers and mercenaries for the local lords. In Epirus, they came as soldiers of Stefan Dusan and then assumed the leadership of cities and wider areas. Their mountainous origins shaped their martial prowess and contributed to their independent spirit, elements they fostered and sold to the highest bidder over the course of their migrations. Their wartime experiences and cohabitation with the local Greek populations seem to have increased their confidence, as evidenced by the existence of groups of professional soldiers who played an active role in the military and political developments of the time. Their lives displayed all the hallmarks of their traditional community, such as close-knit settlements on the fringes of cities in Katunes, not nomadism, though they did display certain elements of it, while their politics largely mirrored the prevailing attitude of interclan conflict that dominated their homeland. The Albanians, a people determined by external factors and thus susceptible to changes, found themselves caught between various competing interests. Up to the late 13th century, they were most decisively influenced by Byzantium. It truly offered the Albanians a political and cultural direction, expressed through the preference of Greek allies or lords and acceptance of the Orthodox typikon and the Byzantine institutional tradition. Their coexistence with the Greeks in difficult times forged common experiences, and Greeks and Albanians alike were incorporated into the local environment as immigrants, farmers, or soldiers. The second and third generation Albanians who lived in Greece in the 15th century were a vibrant part of the local culture, having contributed to the ethnic and cultural pluralism of the region. In Epirus, which bordered their homeland and was culturally and psychologically similar with Greek-speaking and Albanian speakers living side by side for centuries, the two populations exhibited a sort of osmosis which gave rise to a unique new Epirot patriotism. To conclude, there is no doubt that the Albanians were a force to be reckoned with in the late medieval southwestern Balkans, a people who, through their economic, demographic, and military contributions, were incorporated into Byzantine lands and found a homeland primarily in Greece. They developed bonds with the Greeks, fought with and against them, offered their services to both foreign and Greek lords, and became a part of our country's history. Thank you very much.
At least a virtual applause. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Effie, for a very, very, very interesting presentation and PowerPoint and everything. Without further ado, we have a few questions here, and let's see how many we will have next. There is a question.
Excuse me, do I have to stop sharing my?
Oh, yeah, you can stop. You can stop
Okay.
if you want. Yeah.
Can I stop it? Okay.
Yeah.
Better.
There is a question by Nuran. Why, until the creation of the Kingdom of Arberia in 1272 by the Angevins, the Albanians were known as Arbani and not Albania? I think you answered it, but perhaps you can recapitulate or summarize something. It is also in the chat if you want. The question is in the chat.
Yes. I can see the question. As I told you, it was an evolution of the words used by the sources to denote the term Arbanites, Arvanon, their region, and then Albanites, Alvanon, and Albanitia. After the Ottoman conquest, the Albanians named their country as Skyperia, I think, the country of the eagles, and they do not use the word Albania.
And there is another question before that, again by Nuran. What was the role of the Albanian family of, I don't know how to pronounce it, Hirsili in the first Norman attack? I don't know if you have any information about them.
I can see that, but what was the role? I can see that the Albanian family in the first Norman. No, I do not know something about this.
That's okay.
And maybe there are mentions, relevant mentions in Latin sources, not in Greek sources.
Okay, the question by Philip, and then we will go to Kostas. So Philip, do the sources contain any kind of information on ethnic marks or features of the Albanians that could serve as a mean to distinguish them from the Byzantines? If so, when do the first of such information appear and to what extent? So ethnography, more or less, what differentiates the Albani from others, from the other, and what do we see in the sources?
Well, I can see, but if I could see the question, maybe I could understand it better. I cannot.
Do you can you see in the chat in the last
yes,
question?
I'm reading the chat right now.
Yeah, in at the end, the bottom.
The end. This is the...
Yeah. At the bottom, yeah.
Do the sources contain a kind of information? Okay, on ethnic marks. Okay. We found them as maybe different ethnic group in the work of Kantakousinos, and he mentions them in the early 1330 in Thessaly, like groups who came peacefully, and then the Byzantine emperor established them in the area. Maybe we can find in this reference a kind of ethnic differentiation, but we know from the medieval sources that the use of this name is connected with their origins and geography.
Okay, thank you. We have Kostas Yakoumis, if I'm not mistaken. So
hi, Kostas. Hi, Kostas. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you? Well,
let's have your question. Yes.
Thank you. First, I would like to congratulate Professor Sygkellou on account of taking up, let's say, the very difficult endeavor to touch upon an issue that is not only historical but also has, several political ramifications. I would have, if you permit me, let's say, to have a comment and a few suggestions.
Yes, because you have written. Okay. Yes, of course.
This is a topic in which somebody could not ignore Latin sources as well as early Ottoman sources. The very fact that the Ottomans in the 15th century, but also earlier in the travelers, called the entire theme as the theme of Arvanitia, not only in that region, is potentially indicating of something. Second observation, which is empirical and rather, it's philosophical, it's also, let's say, a personal viewpoint. In times, let's say, where there were no rigid borders, it's extremely difficult, if not impossible, for me to think of a people being strictly, let's say, sort of inhabiting a particular territory. So there is no reason why not to believe, let's say, why the Albanians have not been diffused in other parts of it. And I'm not going here into the argument of Kostas Komis with regards to the etymology of Parga. But I'm going, let's say, back. It's a fairly recently published article by John Quadrant in the Byzantine and Modern Greek Studies, where he goes back to the famous passage of Michaila Taliatis, which triggered Era Vranousis, let's say, article. And he combines that with another passage of Konstantinos Porphyrogenitos, where he actually specifies that what was perceived to be at his time Italy actually included places of Dalmatia, thereby compelling us to really reconsider, that particular passage. Personally, I find it extremely hard, as I said, let's say, before, to believe that there were no diffusion. I have treated that in an article published again in the Byzantine and Modern Greek Studies, where on the basis of linguistic evidence, I suggested that those migrations did not, let's say, meet a resistance or that somebody may expect, let's say, for massive migrations of the sort, not only on account of the depletion of the local populations, but also they encountered over there other, let's say, Albanian tribes that inhabited those lands, let's say, in the past. I think also some of this work has been touched by Oswald Brendan. Yes, in some.
Yes, in his PhD thesis. Okay, he saw the people, the composition, the ethnic composition of Byzantine Epirus. Yes. But I'm not sure that he has deepened his work in the case of the Albanians. I'm not sure. Yes. Because
I would certainly utilize the works of Georgios Liakopoulos and Kostas Moustakas.
Yes, I know the works. Yes.
I think that we should not also, let's say, ignore the works of Albanian historians, Pelum Jufi, most notably, let's say, on this part of things. But also, let's say, other Northern Macedonian, let's say, scholars like Tony Filipovsky. And
yes.
Last but not least, I'm wondering whether I'm questioning the accuracy of the terms despotate when it refers to the medieval states of Epirus or Morea. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your notices. And okay, I keep the Sanjak Arvanit, the use of the term Arvanites by the Ottomans. No, it's very useful observation. Thank you, Costa.
Thank you for this very useful interjection. Thank you very much. And a reminder by Walter, who was attended all of our seminars. Thank you very much. That we should keep our modern 21st century politics out of any discussion that we have about origins of people, because he's saying that, when I was in Belgrade in 2013 in a conference, a companion of me talked about the Albanians in the Middle Ages, saying that the first time that they are mentioned was in a medieval source was during the time of Robert of Anjou, and then the Serbians almost elapsed into a popular riot, and they denied the existence of this country, which, of course, it is. I wouldn't be surprised, of course. That's why, I mean, historians ought to be objective, of course. May I ask a question, because I wanted to take it back to the question about, again, ethnography. And Effie, you mentioned about the reputation of the Albanians in the sources as soldiers.
Yes.
And in my mind, because I'm studying more or less the period of 950 to, let's say, Manzikert, and I have the same, I'm asking the same questions about the Armenians and how the Armenians are reflected in the Byzantine sources, because in the military manuals and in the sources like Michael Apagatis, the Armenians are good soldiers, but you cannot trust them. They are duplicitous. They, for some reason. Whether it is a stereotype or not, we have to ask the sources. But what about the earlier, as far back as we can possibly go? I mean, how do the Byzantine sources see the Arvanite as soldiers?
Yeah. Okay. For this period, we don't have many sources to read and to find these such elements. We have the Chronicle of the Toko, and we have, of course, some Venetian informations from the archives, of the Venetian archives, and we try to imagine, or to see what to see the impact of the use of these soldiers on the battlefield. And I think that at the experience of war on the battlefield, we can see the effectiveness of these bodies, these military bodies, and then we can have this view about them. But body of the stradioti, of stradioto, which is a genuine body of geography in Greece, in Central Greece, and Epirus and Peloponnese, and they come from mixed Albanian Arvanites and Greek soldiers. These people seems to be used in operations in the early 15th century. Then, from the Venetians, we know that they're competent. They were okay. They are organized bodies, but we cannot trust the narrative sources. They are too little. We don't have information. Our piece of information is too little. So we study the battlefield and their tactics.
Exactly.
I should say. Yes.
Exactly.
But there is a very interesting PhD which completed in Corfu in the Ionian University by Katerina Corre. Katerina wrote about the stratioti, and she studied the whole phenomenon and connected this with the traditions of the Byzantine holders of Pronia, and she tried to connect them with these traditions, the Byzantine traditions, and the feudal characteristic of the Albanian societies. This is very interesting. Her work is very good on the stratioti, and is unique, I think.
Very good. Very good. Thank you. Do we have any other questions, or yes? I have difficulty in pronouncing the name. Mr. Hu. Yes, please. Would you like to turn on your camera, or would you like to type your question?
Yes.
No. It was it a question, or no? It was this. Yes. It was a clap. Any questions? Anyone else have a question or a comment, or maybe someone that I have missed here in the chat? No. Then okay. I think we can then, if we don't have any other questions or any other anything else, I think we can resume. Angeliki?
No?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you again. Thank you very much for a very nice discussion, and thank you, Kostas, as well, for some very fruitful comments and interjections on this whole discussion.
Costa wrote about this theme. Okay,
yeah.
We can use him.
We can, and we will. And we will. Thank you very much, and thank you very much, everyone, for attending our last for this semester. This is our last seminar series. We will resume in September after our summer break, because as academics we need to rest and we need to focus on our writing. Yes, we need to do that. So we will resume again in September with the same thematic, the Balkans between empires, and we will have a new round of guests. We have many people already in mind with Angeliki that we would like to invite. Again, the last Friday of every month. And we will be expecting all of you again. And it has been an honor. I would like to thank Angeliki again for a very nice organization of these seminar series this year. All of our guests and our final guests, to wrap it up, Effie, thank you very much. And
I would like for this opportunity and this friendly environment, I'd say. Thank you very much.
Thank
and
you very much.
Angeliki.
And I would personally like to wish everyone a happy summer and εις το επανειδήν.
Εις το επανειδήν. Πάνω απ' όλα, καλό καλοκαίρι. Έφη, σε ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ.
Και εγώ σας ευχαριστώ. Να είμαστε καλά, Αγγελική.
Ευχαριστούμε πολύ.
Από Σεπτέμβριο. Γεια σας.
Από Σεπτέμβριο. Καλά μπάνια. Καλά μπάνια.
Συγχαρητήρια πάλι.
Ευχαριστώ πολύ. Να είστε καλά όλοι.
Bye bye.
Καλό σας βράδυ. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.